I am Katlego K Kolanyane-Kesupile from Gaborone, Botswana, but originally born in Francistown. Yeah.
And you have written a book of poetry. Tell me what the poetry is about.
The collection of poems that I've got is called On About the Same Old Things, and it was published by Bahati Books. It's a collection of poems over 4 different movements. So there's a movement on politics, on faith, on love, and on family. And these poems are an exploration of a queer livelihood, but African livelihood from a queer perspective. And not just any sort of queer perspective, a millennial queer perspective. Yeah.
And so what kinds of things do you talk about in those different movements?
In the movement about love, it's an exploration between self-love as well as romantic love. So being the one who never really got into a relationship, or watching relationships unfold and watching them deconstruct. In the movement about family, it's about the sorts of relationships you build through blood relations as well as the sorts of friendships that create family connections, but also how some of the family relations you've got become toxic and how some of them help you grow. In politics, it is, within the African context, especially the sub-Saharan African context, we are democratic, but even with that democracy, the political game is still the same. There are people who have interests, and it's not necessarily the politics of parliament, it is the politics of being a human being, it's the politics of governance. The movement on faith, I think, for me was very necessary because I am a faithful, I believe.
Yeah.
But in that sense of believing and belief, it's been a movement between religious systems and traditional beliefs, and having to balance that with a post-colonial mentality of somebody who, yes, has grown up with religion in my life, but not necessarily now feeling that to be in a church, in a building, is to prove that I am a believer. And this dichotomy of queer people not believing, but then if they do believe, are they being converted? So that's what I've explored in this particular collection.
And you were born, and you didn't think of yourself as a boy. Describe the journey from when you started to where you are now.
Well, I think the journey's been a rather generic one, in that there have been the milestones along the way. I do say I can't say I never really identified as boy, but I also never really identified as girl. I just knew that I was alive and moving forward, and I had certain skills that some of them were attributed towards the boys and some of them were attributed towards the girls. And I was able to skirt between both realms. And to say that I knew very early on that I was not what I was expected to be is true, but I never knew what I expected myself to be. I only just expected myself to be the best at whatever I was doing. Whether it was athletics, then I would run faster than the boys, and if it was knitting or crocheting, then I would do it, and I'd do it well. Whether it was dancing, I would do that well, and people would always say to me, oh, you're so good, or say to my mother, what a pretty little girl, and she would then say, no, but it's my son. And words like that never really had much of an effect. The one thing I did know from very early on was every single time people said to me, oh no, but you're gay, I didn't identify with that. And so I knew where I wasn't, but this umbrella of LGBTQIA plus was not there for us in the 90s in Botswana. So it was just a matter of grow, discover, reflect certain people and certain traits, but not necessarily feel that those traits were exactly what you needed to be. And so moving through that, there were the years of, I guess, psychological battle between myself and myself. Not so much about the outside world, but constantly saying, if you're supposed to be happy, then why aren't you? And it was in that search for happiness and true knowledge of self that I got to the point where now, yes, I do identify as trans woman, but I identify as trans before trans woman, which still allows me, in my case, in my understanding, the ability to keep crossing, because that's what I've always done. I've always crossed between one and another, and never said, once I've crossed, I stay.
You've talked about the arguments you have with yourself about who you are, but how does that reflect in terms of the wider society within Botswana?
So the interesting thing about Botswana is that Setswana is a gender-neutral language. So if you were to refer to me in a Setswana conversation, you wouldn't speak about the supposed gender that I am. But as soon as you bring English into it, then the he's and the she's start to complicate how I present myself and how you perceive my perception, how you perceive my presentation of self. And so with that, moving in spaces in Botswana has been a very interesting experience, in that I do certain things with the knowledge that they will disrupt the space. And you disrupt with the knowledge that there will be some sort of backlash. And I always face that backlash with the premise of educating. So I could shave my facial hair and be pedantic about that, but I have the ability to grow facial hair, and if I do grow it out, it doesn't necessarily change who I am. In the fact that we've got bearded ladies now, and you've got women with flat chests, and it's for me to say I could be a textbook woman, but then being a textbook woman robs me of my history and the lessons and the experiences that have gotten me to where I am. And so to be able to represent the people like me who also might not have the money to go through all these sorts of body making, body manufacturing procedures in order to pass for normal, and I use normal in a very, very
loose sense,
but it's also one of my least favorite words. But even with that, it's to say, what is normal? When is normal? Is normal waking up and wearing a bathrobe while you're brushing your teeth and having breakfast? Or is normal the fact that I don't actually own a bathrobe and I'm always dressed as if I'm going out to an event? And that's my normal. So yes, being in Botswana, it's been an interesting experience of navigating people's the culture that we have of respect, as up against this culture of owning spaces and saying this is what needs to be and this cannot be. Whereas in Setswana culture, building from mutual respect allows you to start understanding somebody.
And you were speaking earlier, what's your ambition?
So my ambition is to be in the United Nations as the Secretary General. But, and for me that role is not so much about a seat that I would occupy, but more of the kind of role that I'd be able to play in the world and shaping the world. Somebody like me being able to sit in a position where you don't have to convince people that you deserve respect, where you don't have to argue with people to say, I actually matter, which is a problem that we've faced we all face, really. Our inferiority complexes are building simply because we keep getting told, you aren't yet worthy of this. And so my aspiration is really to get to a point where I'm building a world where ignorance is a choice rather than a state of being, where people know and information is accessible. And if it means I'm in the United Nations and I push for greater access to information, then perfect. But I do the same sort of role as an educator, as a performer, as a writer, is to say, listen, I know that you might not know this, so I'm going to give you access to this. Use it, and should it be useful to you, great. If it isn't useful to you, hopefully you'll find something that is more useful than what I've produced or what I've done with my life. But yeah, it's to live a life of purpose and keep effecting change in the lives of others.